Hello and welcome to my beginner guide on how to play the controversial spec in Wrath of the Lich King, Arms Warrior. Let me first start off the guide by saying Arms Warriors are by no means better than Fury endgame, but they perform better than Fury early on in the expansion if played correctly. So this guide is mostly applicable for a fresh server with tier 7 and tier 8. So now when we have that out of the way, let's go through the changes for Arms from Burning Crusade into Wrath. The first change is a very welcome one, and it's a slam not resetting the swing timer anymore. So you can now slam whenever you want. I still recommend using a swing timer as an indicator to know when you get rage from white swings. Next on the list is that you now need 2 good keybinds for Rend and Overpower, as they are part of your rotation and very strong thanks to these new talents. You don't have to worry much about stance dancing because battle stance is getting buffed. You can also charge while in combat, and Thunderclap is uncapped and hits all enemies around you. Please note that Thunderclap crits also proc deep wounds, and when you spec Insight, Thunderclapping is a really good global when you AoE. Now, the biggest change to Arms, or even Fury for that matter, might be hard to guess, but it's so important that your entire rotation and gearing is based around it. Deep Wounds gets a total overhaul in Wrath, and you could make an entire video explaining how it now works. But the main takeaway is that it's basically a better version of Ignite. Every time you crit, you will add a weapon damage dot, and it will keep growing instead of resetting from every additional crit. This makes crit extremely good for Arms, and since it's not normalized for weapon speed, you want to use a slow weapon for more Deep Wounds damage. And finally, not all changes are for the better if you are a die-hard Burning Crusade fan. Firstly, it's the infamous sword spec that is getting nerfed to the ground, and it is no longer viable thanks to the new poleaxe buff. Secondly, you lose Death Wish, which was very good together with Bloodlust on short fights. Bladestorm is only really good for cleave and PvP. Blood Frenzy is now shared with combat rogues, and exposed armor is the same as under armor, so Arms is no longer a must for a raiding roster. Usually combat rogue is what guilds bring from tier 8 onward. And lastly, Battle Shout is no longer needed because Blizzard removed party buffs. Commonly used is a paladin using improved Blessing of Might. Next up we have the talents, and this is the best spec early on. Your rage generation will be limited because of low gear, so you will spec into anger management and skip improved Mortar Strike. Mortar Strike is simply too expensive, and the 2-set tier 7 makes slam deal roughly the same damage with superior DPR. It's still okay to take Mortar Strike for times you are moving and can't slam, or for certain bosses that you want a healing debuff on. Now your major glyphs are gonna be Heroic Strike, Rending and Execution, and when you cleave you wanna replace Heroic Strike glyph with Cleaving. If you are feeling brave and want to try out Arms when you have tier 9 gear or better, your spec changes slightly. You move 1 point from Anger Management into Mortal Strike, and 1 more point from either Weapon Mastery, Juggernaut or Sudden Death for a fully improved Mortal Strike. You also swap out Glyph of Execution to Glyph of Mortal Strike. You can easily have more than 18 expertise from gear, so removing points from Weapon Mastery is then your best option. Some guides you might have come across showcase improved Execute, which was the go-to spec before Execute was nerfed in tier 9 in the original game. I do not recommend playing this spec because you lose out a lot on cleave and deep wounds damage, and the only time you should consider this is if your raid leader wants improved commanding shout and you don't have a Fury Warrior. Don't forget your minor glyphs, Thunderclap, Charge and Command or Battle Shout. Moving on, we have the stat prio for Arms in PVE, which is actually pretty straightforward. First you want the hit cap. After you have reached hit cap, your main stat is strength, Later on it changes to armor pen, but we will come back to that later in the video. Next stat that is very good is of course crit. Next we have expertise cap. Expertise cap is good, but it's not very important, so you will never use expertise gems over strength or armor pen. Please note that as you get a lot of expertise from gear, you can take out talents in weapon mastery. Lastly we have haste, and haste is extremely bad, so if you have haste on your gear, you are missing out on some other stats, so please avoid it. Things you need to know about armor pen is that it's not good in tier 7, so don't worry about it, and it's by far the best stat in tier 10. It's worth soft capping, best in slot tier 8, and you will only commit to hard cap when you have full bis in tier 9 or better. Because you don't have improved berserker stance or bloodthirst, which scales with attack power, you will actually swap to armor pen earlier when you play arms. When you're calculating your armor pen cap, you should know that the cap is 1400 and your battle stance is giving you 10%. So one example is with Mjolnir in tier 8 bis, then your soft cap is 595 rating. Next up we have the games. And since we now know what stats are best, it's easy. Your best game is Bold, Scarlet and Dragon's Eyes, and you want them in all your red slots or in a slot with no good socket bonus. If you have a yellow socket with a good bonus, or if you need more hit, this is where you want to put these games. And lastly, don't forget to use one pearl or tier to activate your metagame. Usually you put this in a good blue socket, like your Titan Steel Helm. And of course, the metagame is your Relentless Agility one. Consumables are the usual flask and strength food. When you want armor pen later, you swap to rhino food. And because haste is so bad, you will use armor pot that gets turned into attack power from your talents. Or if you can find an alchemist that have it, you can also use strength potion from Burning Crusade. Because you can change race in Wrath, it's also important to bring up that orcs are by far the best race for arms. They gain expertise with access, which is useful in every tier, and they also have Blood Fury, which is free extra damage. If you must play Alliance, there is no clear winner. For raid DPS you want a Drena in your group, but if you already have one, or if you want to play Arena, I would suggest going Human for the free PvP trinket. Moving on to professions. The first profession should always be Crafting, because it gives the highest stats and you can also choose and pick depending on what you need. Second profession is probably engineering if you are in a tryhard guild that wants the Battle Chicken buff. But since Nitro Boost isn't that important and Battle Chicken can be annoying, you could also just pick tailoring, which is pretty good. In tier 9, when you want to commit to armor pen hard cap, blacksmithing jumps in power because of the new epic gems. Now it's time for the fun stuff. You don't have a regular rotation like other classes, but instead you have a priority list of what skill to use, and it can be pretty scary at first, but it's not that difficult once you learn it. First you want to keep up Rend at all times, and this is to activate Taste for Blood. If you are fighting a boss, you want to use Under Armor, because frankly it's probably the reason why your guild invited you in the first place. Then you want to make sure you overpower every Taste for Blood prop before you get a new one. If you are not expertise capped and you get a dodge, this is also the time you want to overpower. Then you want to use Bladestorm, since Bladestorm has a 90-second cooldown and pretty much every single trinket you will have has a 45-second cooldown. They will always sync up if you use Bladestorm when the trinket is proccing. Then we have Execute. If you have a sudden death proc or if target is low HP, we execute. If you can't execute, you will start slamming. If you still have high rage after all this, you want to Q Heroic Strike to not cap out on rage. And if you can't slam because boss is moving or you are moving, then you can press Mortal Strike or Thunderclap or any other global cooldown. If you want to play arms in tier 9 with the Mortal Strike spec, you want to use Mortal Strike on cooldown after overpower. When you have more than one target, your cleave priority changes a bit from the single target one. You will still use Rend and overpower, You only need to put rend on one target, so pick the target that will live the longest. You want to use sweeping strikes on cooldown and also thunderclap for deep wounds and war set procs. When you have thunderclap and sweeping strikes on cooldown, you want to blade storm with the trinket, and this will require a good tank, or you will probably pull aggro and need a good healer to keep you alive. If you have rage left, you also wanna cleave with the glyph of cleaving. Speaking of 4 sets tier 7, it gives your bleeds a 10% chance per tick to reduce the next spell by 5 rage. It might not look good enough at first glance, but when you realize deep wounds ticks every second on every target, the value of 4 sets skyrockets when you cleave. In fact, it's still best in slot in Uldvar when you can cleave and proc deep wounds on everything.
Det var satan vilka grova armar du har!
Before we wrap up this guide, I will briefly talk about what gear you should aim for on a fresh server and tier 7. Starting with the helm, your prebis is gonna be Titan Steel, and your best in slot is gonna be tier 7 because of the 4 set. Your starter neck is gonna be the badge one. In the raids you can pick up Fool's Trial if you need hit, and your best in slot is gonna be the one from the Malagos quest. Shoulders are from Sons of Odin rep, and your tier 7 shoulders are your best in slot. The blue cloak from Gundrak Trash is really good for being blue, so you should pick it up on Auction House. In Next 10 you can pick up Cloak of Mastery if you need hit, and if you don't need hit, Edge Winter Cloak from Next 25 is your best option. Also make sure you take the correct enchant depending on what profession you have. Chest is easy, you just buy the tier 7 from emblems and then you upgrade to the higher eye level one. And for bracers you buy the crafted ones. If you're fine on hit you can buy the Dragon Friend bracers. And your best in slot depends if you need expertise or hit. The tier 7 gloves are bad, but you are forced to use them early for the set bonuses. But when you have the set bonus without the gloves, you can use the Sunward gloves or the Patchwork gloves, but your best in slot is of course the Malagos ones. If you struggle on hit, you can enchant hit on gloves. As a side note, it's still good to pick up the tier 7 gloves for Uldor when you will use the Yogg hard mode legs together with the 4 set tier 7. Because expertise is so hard to come by early, you will buy the emblem leather belt with expertise. And your best belt is the expertise plate one. Utgardi Keep has your first legs and your best in slot is the tier 7 legs. Your starter boots are either from Ebon Blade or Argent Crusade if you need hit. And your best in slot are easily the one from Malagos. If you need more hit, you could also put the Ice Walker on your boots. Having rings to swap around for different stats you need is really good to have early on. So you should get the Nexus ring from the tree boss, Gundrak ring for expertise, and you can craft the hit ring Scarlet Shadows. When you start raiding you can pick up the expertise ring from Next 10, Circle of Death, and Ruthlessness in Next 25. But your best in slot rings are Surge Needle ring from Malagos 10 and Great Ring of Collision from OS 10 2 Drakes. You have a few trinket options early, but they are not that great to be honest, because what you really want to have is Greatness and Grimtoll. If you still have gold after buying Greatness, you can craft Nessingwary 4k or get the crossbow from Utgardi Keep. In raids you can get the Spinning Fate if you need hit, or the gun from KT. Your previous weapons are either the Violet Toad polearm or the House of Lightning axe if you play Orc. On some servers they even added the Hateful weapons, so you can pick that up from Honor. When you start raiding Next 10, the Mexna polearm is very good because it's very slow, and you can also pick up the axe from KT 10 man. When you start raiding 25 man, Cryptfiend's Bite it's very good, and the best in slot is Betrayer of Humanity. That's all I had for this guide. I hope people found it helpful and thank you for watching.